So when is this your friend Roger at the district office that you forget things within 5 minutes?
Oh, well.
What's that all about?
No. Well, it was, I and so that doesn't, Roger
With this,
is, so I just go back and, Josh gave me the choice.
oh, that's what you said. Oh, I
So, yeah, it was mine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. It wasn't the businessman.
No. So,
Your wife may be a little bit more charitable. Though.
yeah.
Well, good. Oh, what's that? Oh! I've seen pictures on Facebook. Yeah. No, the marks aren't quite. Just increase the brush. But no, that's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. So, what, about 9-10 months? Yeah. No, I know. It's just slogging. Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, it looks like I have a lot of authority here, Pastor Lyon. Yeah. Okay, Mark, I don't know. So, good to see you, Jim. So this...
Okay, so like on this side.
Oh, right.
So you just slide in.
Oh,
But yeah, so don't hit the mic in this direction. I've done it.
okay. Yeah, that's happened to all of us. Yeah, it's probably your best sermon ever, too. Yeah. Maybe not as good as David Beekman's. Oh, I see. I probably want it on this thing.
Is that it? It's like,
How are you doing? Good. Yes, okay.
and then you get
I won't touch it. Yeah, okay.
it's like it works sometimes.
Yeah. Am I on the, or maybe you have that off? I think so. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get everyone back to square one here. And hope you had a good break. And now that I have at least half of your attention, that's a good thing. We will go to noon, obviously, and Ben Dose will alert me to our time about 11:50. Sound all right? Well, good. So what I would like to do is, first of all, make sure that my sound system is working okay, and that this will stay on my ear. We once had, as a pastor in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma for 10 years, we had Ozzy Hoffman came for our dedication. And, this was Ozzy in kind of his latter years. And the sound system didn't work during his sermon. And he just blasted the pulpit. He said, "The devil's always in the sound system." So I'll never forget that. Okay, let's just do a little bit of review. I want you to look at Isaiah chapter 40. We're going back to the why, all right? Repetition is the mother of learning. So the first time gospel in a theological sense appears in the Bible is Isaiah chapter 40, verse 9. Get up on a high mountain, me beseret Zion. Evangelist oi angelizomai would be the Septuagintal Greek there. Zion. So Zion and Jerusalem are pictured as gospelers. Gospelers. And then, what is the gospel? Verse 9, Isaiah chapter 40. Again, we're just kind of going back to what is the gospel. Say to the cities of Judah, Hine Elohechem. Behold, not her God, his God, their God, some God, any God. Not even the God, but what? Your God. Which fits nicely with chapter 40, verse 1. Nakamu, Nakamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem. Comfort, comfort, Ami, my people, says your God. So the gospel, in a nutshell, John 3:16, we get that. But at least here, the gospel is your God, right? Which takes us back, as I said, to Exodus chapter 6, verse 7, where you have the covenant formula for the first time. I'll be your God, you'll be my people. So this is the gospel. Well, then verses 10, 11 tell us who this God is. We go here because the Isaiah 52 verse 7 text we looked at earlier and 40, 1 through 11 are called mere texts, okay? Not my vocabulary, but people who study this section of Isaiah, mere texts. They say a lot of the same things, okay? And here, it's the arm motif, the arm motif. So here is your God, verse 10, right? His arm, everybody there, Isaiah 40, verse 10. This is your God. His arm is ruling for him. So there's the bare arm, right, that we saw earlier in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 10. All right? His arm is ruling. His arm is bare. His bulging biceps. But then verse 11. See, verse 11, we have arm again, and his arm gathers. Little telaim, right? Talathakum, the Aramaic here. Little lamb in his bosom, okay, right close to his heart. He lifts up and leads those who have young. So the vulnerable ones, the weak ones, the marginalized, the least, the last, the lost ones, he gathers with his arm. So there's the arm of 53:1, right? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And then you go into more of the four servant song. I simply want us to understand that the New Testament gospel is the Isaiah gospel. In fact, it's the biblical gospel. That our God is tough, right? Verse 10, Isaiah 40. He's tender. He's like a shepherd, right? Gathering little lambs. He's mighty, merciful and mighty. We sing this in one of our hymns, right? He's mighty in verse 10. He's merciful, verse 11. Isaiah then assumes we know this gospel when he's going to reiterate the runner in chapter 52, 7, and as I said, goes into the fourth servant song. All right, so that is just a bit of review about what we mean by the word gospel. It is a focus upon God's sovereignty and his saving power, right? And then, of course, if you want to take a look at Ezekiel of all people, 3 verse 1, and 3 verse 1 in Ezekiel. This whole section actually begins at the end of chapter 2 of Ezekiel. But Ezekiel, like Jeremiah, like Revelation 10:10, internalizes the word. Right there, Ezekiel 3:1. Son of man, eat, whatever you find here. Eat the scroll. Eat the scroll. Internalize it. We all know that once we have something internalized, then it is more credible when we speak it, right? I own this. It owns me, to be more exact, right? So that's the second part of what we've covered. internalizing the Word of God. Okay, so that's just a bit of review. We are called to run with beautiful feet, just like the servant does, and we are called to prepare ourselves as well as our servants. So now we go to how. How? Our third question, as I said in the introduction, we're going to spend a lot more time on the how. The how. But if we don't know what the gospel is and we're not preparing ourselves, forget the how, right? The how then is just technique. We're into much more than just technique here, obviously. Okay, so how? And I've got this picture here of course, Albert Einstein. Here we go. At the 1939 World's Fair in New York, Albert Einstein spoke to 200,000 people at the opening ceremony. Those standing in the rain were only a fraction of those who listened to the event on the radio. Einstein had just turned 60, and event coordinators told him he had 5 minutes to explain how the largest flash of artificial light in history, a flash that would be visible for a radius of 40 miles, was made possible through science. Einstein refused, arguing that 5 minutes wasn't nearly enough time to explain all of this. Soon, however, Einstein relented, stating that it is the scientist's duty to communicate with the public. Einstein began this historic speech with these remarkable words, quote, "If science, like art, is to perform its mission truly and fully, its achievements must enter not only superficially, but with their inner meaning into the conscience of people." So for 5 minutes, at the 1939 World's Fair in New York, Einstein took something that was very, very complex and made it what? Understandable. It's a great metaphor, right, for preaching. How do we preach? We take something that is very complex, right? That little rundown we did through Isaiah 52 and 53, then go to the mere text in chapter 40. We can probably kind of pick that up, right? If you were explaining that to lay people, they would say, "Pastor, you need to be a professor at a seminary," right? So that's pretty complex, assuming like exile and glory and shalom and the arm of the Lord and restoration of creation, all people will see. All that is fairly complex, and how Paul then transitions that same message in Romans 10, right? Taking the hymn of 52:7 and making it them, plural, the called and ordained, right? My gosh, to explain all that to lay people would take some time, right? But that's what we're called to do. To take the biblical gospel and make it simple, understandable. It's interesting in this class I teach every semester that all students have to take, unless they're church work students, they take their own, Old Testament, New Testament, etc. But the vast majority of our students are Gen Ed. I have them write essays on what they want to learn from this class. Just one page, just to get to know students. I usually have 30 to 35 students in these classes. So I just got done reading them on Saturday, because we start our semester a week ago today. And I would say about half of these essays, and this is par for the course, these students say, "I grew up in church, I went to VBS, and again, not, they're Roman Catholics, they're non-denoms, some are Lutherans, but I just didn't understand it. I just didn't understand what he was trying to say." My gosh, and this is, it's just jumps out at me. Most of these students would say they went through some form of catechesis. And to a person, about 50% in every class. I just didn't understand. Now, some of that's on them, right? We've all taught confirmation. Yeah, I often thought, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't run around with girls who do. But I don't drink that much. I just don't. I mean, it's not like I'm a pietist or anything, but anyway. But I thought if I ever start drinking, it will be because of 8th grade confirmation class. Right. If I ever go to the bottle, that's the reason. But the point is that sometimes it's on the kids, right? But sometimes it's on the pastor who just hasn't made it simple enough. Simple enough. Now here's something I've said for a long time. Not simplistic. There's a huge difference. I'm not talking about being simplistic, all right? Jargon, simplistic. No, not simplistic, but simple, understandable. What Einstein did in that famous speech in 1939, right? Make it simple, not simplistic. Okay, next slide. How do we do it? So now there's probably about 5 or 6 different subsections to this how. Everybody got it? So here would be the first one. We're going to spend more time on others. But you've heard this. And as I was preparing for this time in Carroll, Iowa, I thought a lot of probably what I'm going to say you already know. This is just reminding you, sharpening your blade, etc. So I'm not here to, I don't know how to put it, I'll just be blunt. I don't have the impression that I'm teaching you all new stuff. You've looked at Isaiah, you've looked at Romans, you've looked at, preparing the preacher as much as preparing the sermon. I get all that. So please don't think that I'm coming down from Mount Sinai and I feel like I have all this new stuff. I don't. But hopefully it's stuff that helps you review. You might learn a few new things. But just affirm, right? What you're doing or what you aspire to do. So everybody okay with that? I kind of gave up the messianic mantle. That was about a week ago. And now life is going a little bit better, all right? So anyway, you've seen stuff like this, all right? Logos. So how do I have simple but not simplistic sermons? That's the overall piece that we're looking at the how. So we do the logos part. That's the research. That's the original languages. That's the commentaries. That's illustrations, right? The logos, the word. What happens, though, as we all know, is we think once we've done that, we've done our work, right? No. This is Aristotelian rhetoric, right? The pathos, the passion. And we'll look at a Richard Kapfer article on that momentarily. But for now, pathos means that there's something that's been internalized. There's something that's real. There's something that, this is what Paul says. This is 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16. The only time Paul uses the word woe, ouai in Greek, and most of the time in the Old Testament and New Testament, woe means you're dead. Everybody got that? So if someone comes up and says, woe, it means you're spiritually dead. All right? Doesn't mean you're on a roller coaster ride at Disney World. All right? Whoa! No. Something else. So the only time Paul uses woe is 1 Corinthians 9:16, where he says, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. See, there's the pathos. See, I'm spiritually dead. My life is worth nothing. Woe to me if I don't oi angelizomai. And for Paul, what's the gospel, at least in a nutshell, right? Isaiah 52, 7 through 53:12. So there's pathos, right? I'm compelled to preach. It's Jeremiah chapter 20, right? He says, I'm not going to preach anymore. Anybody feel like that? I don't want to preach anymore. I've had it. I'm done. And then Jeremiah says, the word of God is like a fire burning in my heart. I'm compelled. I must. See, there's the pathos. Now, let's be honest. There's some Sundays you got it, some Sundays you don't. It's okay, right? If there are years that you don't got it, then it's just, it's not over, right? But it's time to do a checkup from the neck up, right? What are you thinking? What's your strategy? So how do I have simple but not simplistic sermons? I do my work, the logos, the pathos, the ethos, right? The ethos. Here's just a good reminder. The ethic of the speaker. How credible am I? Right? How credible am I? And then we go back to being in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. I won't review that. Revelation 1 verse 10. Also then, the kairos. The kairos. The kairos, right, the Greek word for time, is at least rhetorically meant to have a bottom line, right? What do you want people to do? What do you want people to think as a result of your sermon? See, so that's where it gets simple but not simplistic. Because I can have the logos, the pathos, the ethos, but then I'm thinking about some of these students that I have at St. Paul is, well, what's he actually trying to tell me? Right? What's he actually trying to tell me? What's kind of the bottom line? What's the kairos? What's the time in which I am called to act? All right. So that's another way to kind of review and look at what we're doing. Next slide. So now we're going to get into the pathos part. All right, the pathos part. Because if I have the logos, the ethos, and the kairos, but there's no right fire in my bones, I'm compelled. I'm just not hired to do this. I'm not just paid to do this. I've told the congregations I've served, you pay me to go to voters' meetings. You know, I make $800 an hour at voters' meetings, right? But you don't pay me to preach. I'll do that for free, all right? So here's the pathos part. What does that look like? So this painting here is iconic painting by Norwegian artist Edvard Munch, M-U-N-C-H. 1893. You may know what it's called? The Scream. The Scream. 2010, it sold for over $200 million. The Scream. I mean, famous piece of painting, right? Why do I put that up here when we're drilling down into pathos? Because this painting shows someone's emotions, right? A very memorable way. So this being the Richard Kapfer Preaching Symposium, I thought would be a good idea to quote from him. This is actually something that I have gone to over the years. It's the seminary, St. Louis Seminary, used to have something called the Winchell Lecture. And so Richard Kapfer, while president of Iowa East District, February 15th, 1989, presented this lecture titled, "But What Does It Feel Like, Pastor? Where's the passion?" Right? Because let me just say this. If we have a godly passion, we're going to try and make it as simple and understandable as possible. Right? Read my lips kind of stuff. Because it's so important. So what does it feel like, Pastor? And then you can download this whole article. Go to the seminary website, Concordia Journal, April 1990. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I am going to pick up maybe about 3 paragraphs under the how, the pathos part. Now, for most of us, we kind of jump at what word? Feel. Feel. Boy, if there's anything Lutherans are against is what? Feelings, right? Feelings. How many times do you get up in your sermon and say, feelings aren't facts. Don't trust your feelings, right? Feelings are here today, gone today. Feelings are undependable. Don't trust your feelings. Trust the objective gospel. Anybody see? Fair enough, right? However, right, we're back to all of these ditches, one way or the other. It doesn't mean, though, that we negate feelings, that we dismiss feelings, that we ignore feelings. Because if it's going to be simple, it's going to address in some way people's feelings. If it's going to be memorable, it's going to address their feelings. It's not going to only address their feelings. It's not going to stop there, right? But it will take this into account. So here's some Richard Kapfer. Preacher, after you have completed all the vital background work, the logos part, after you have illustrated it, intellectualized it, I have one more thing to ask of you. What does it feel like, preacher? Are you feeling what I am feeling? Are you being honest with the text, with yourself and with me? Do you live in my world? With this question, but what does it feel like, preacher? We have taken on the task of taking you into who you are, deep down inside. Kapfer goes on. It was a great revelation for me to discover my beloved second-grade teacher in the grocery store buying food for a mortal body that needed to exist on more than chalk dust and Crayolas. She's a real person. One of, getting back to Aristotelian rhetoric, he goes on, render the audience well-disposed to the speaker. You ever heard that one before? Render the audience well-disposed to the speaker. What's that mean? It means if they don't like you, they probably won't like what you're saying, right? This is all under first article stuff, right? Creational article. We're not talking about second or third article. But if I come across as a professor, let's put it that way, if I come across as aloof, condescending, judgmental, if I come across with the idea that, oh, NFL playoffs, those are going on right now, see, then most people are going to say, you don't live in my world. You live in a different world. You know this. Most people already think that anyway, right? I mean, let's be honest. Your farmers, your bankers, your school teachers, most people think we are very strange. And Joshua Lowe would actually, no, I'm just kidding. Okay. So we have to, right, establish credibility with them, and one way to do that is by addressing their feelings. Kapfer goes on. In his 1838 divinity school address at Harvard, Ralph Waldo Emerson expressed his disdain for a preacher whose sermon, now I'm quoting Kapfer, who's quoting Ralph Waldo Emerson, had not one word intimating that he had laughed or wept, was married or in love, had been commended, cheated, or chagrined, the capital secret of his profession, namely to convert life into truth, he had not yet learned. Close quote for Emerson. Kapfer goes on. The true preacher for Emerson was one who dealt out life to his listeners. Life passed through the fire of his thought. That's Emerson again. Kapfer. Helmut Thielicke remarked about German pastors who had experienced the horrors of the Second World War as it devastated Germany. Many would have thought that this would have influenced their preaching, he wrote. Instead, he remarked about one preacher, quote, now, Kapfer quoting Thielicke, in the pulpit he appeared to go on without any perceptible break from where he had left off in 1939, close quote. Kapfer says, we are not talking about emotionalism, sentimentality, navel-gazing, or feelings for the sake of feelings. We are talking about human persons sitting in the pews with every human feeling about life. And we are talking about sacred scripture that talks much about human persons with human feelings about life and God. Moreover, we're talking about the God who understands us as we are, including our human feelings, and about the Son of God who indeed, quote, can sympathize with our weaknesses, Hebrews 5, or is touched with the feeling of our infirmities. Jesus understands us as whole persons. Part of who we are involves our emotions, our feelings. Now, homiletians have a term for this. It's called psychological center. Psychological center. That is to say, generally, I don't want to say in every sermon, but generally, if we can't identify what feeling we're addressing in people's lives, we won't connect with them because they come with feelings. And so do you, right? We get this. It's a bridge. It's not the sum total of the sermon. But if you're going to render the audience well disposed to the speaker, we want to be human beings who talk about feelings. Now you can't talk about worry. That's too broad. But you can't talk about being worried on the 17th day of January in 2022. That's a little bit too specific. So our psychological centers need to be broad enough that they include everybody, but narrow enough that there's an edge to them, right? What's your story about? Worry. That's not good enough. What's your sermon about? Fear. That's not good enough. What's your sermon about? Bad relationships. That's not good enough. See, those are good feelings that people have, but they also need to be specific. I mean, it's tough, right? Tough. Most biblical texts, though, right, will tell you what the feeling is, right? The psychological center. So this is Kapfer again. Quote, we would suggest that you answer the question in the following ways. That is to say, how do you figure out what the feelings are, the emotions? 1, ask the human feeling, life situation question of the text. What was going on then? What is the human emotion, human problem, human need, human tragedy that's stated or implied? I don't know about you, but I was never taught this, all right, when I was a budding seminarian. And yet, this is this is really important on the how. On the how. Number 2, put yourself into that age, that situation of the text. Put your curiosity to work. How would it affect you? How do you feel when you read this? How are you similar in the text? What questions, hurts, needs, and emotions are triggered in you? So what does it feel like, preacher, right? Again, I don't want to overstate this, that every sermon has to address it. I think that would be sometimes not being fair to the text. On the other side, what Kapfer is saying, and what we all know, is the pathos part, the feeling part, needs to be a part, right? a question we ask. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears here, and we go to another piece, to the how. All right. So what have we covered? Make it simple, not simplistic. Logos, pathos, ethos, kairos. Kairos, close the deal. Have a bottom line. What's this all about? Another way to look at the logos, pathos, ethos, kairos is hook, book, took. You ever heard that? That's a good strategy for sermonizing. Hook, book, took. And a great way to hook people is to talk about their feelings. Right? Their feelings. And again, I want to reiterate, you don't stay there. But we got to hook them. We got to hook them. I think one of the worst sermon outlines is the text, the law, the gospel, the cultural situation, the sitzim leben, the doctrinal ideas, application. Right? By the time you get to application, you know what most people are thinking? This doesn't relate to me at all. You got to get the application going, what? At the get-go. The hook. If you don't hook them, forget the book. Right? So you hook, and one of the main ways to hook, right, is to address what people are feeling like. Right? So that's another way to look at the logos, pathos, ethos, kairos. Hook, book, and then the took. Took. What do you want me to believe? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to think? Okay, so that was our first part. And then the Richard Kapfer part helps us at least have the question, was it feel like to me? And was the text address in terms of feelings? So now we're going to go to a wonderful book called Preaching Without Notes. Preaching Without Notes. And here's just some Latin for the day. This is Augustine. Veritas patient, veritas latient, veritas movient. Make the truth plain, all right? Patent, right? Patient. Make the truth latient, all right? Pleasing. And veritas movient, make it moving. This, again, another way to talk about logos, pathos, ethos, kairos, hook, book, took. Make it simple, not simplistic. But you want to make it plain. See? Simple. You want to make it pleasing. Pleasing. And you want to make it moving, right? You want a took part. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this Joseph Webb book. We're still right under how. Preaching Without Notes. Webb is a professor of both speech communication and homiletics at Pepperdine University, Claremont School of Theology. And so I'm going to just spend a little time seeing what he has to say about this. And these are my notes on the book. What preacher hasn't been in fear of exactly what this book promotes? Preaching, God forbid, without notes. I remember as 1981, my first homiletics professor was none other than Dale Meyer. And you know what the capstone experience was in the class? Preach without notes. Anybody ever had that in your Hom 1 class? Yeah. I mean, whoa. Preach without notes. I can't do that at all. And the worst thing was you had to preach without notes in front of who? Your classmates. Oh boy, this is a lot of fun. I didn't have a lot of David Beagley's. David's a nice guy. My class, our class, man, slice and dice, Judgment City, right? Yeah. There's nothing worse than preaching in front of your peers, right? So preaching without notes, what's all that about? It sounds like it's impossible. So many preachers' self-talk goes like this. Why, without a manuscript, I could very well make mistakes. And I could make statements that are irrelevant, ill-considered, improper, or alas, even untrue. And you know what? You will. You will. I 20 years being a pastor, etc. I remember one time I was preaching at Chapel Cross in North St. Louis as a seminary professor in St. Louis. And I said definitively, and you know that we don't believe in real presence. Oh, did I just say that? Oh no, these people are locked and loaded in the narthex. They're going to shoot me. Okay. So you will say things that are not true. What did I do at that point in my sermon? I said, time out. Folks, what I just said was absolutely, categorically, and eternally wrong. You suppose they kind of remember that point? Yeah. We believe in real presence. Okay, all right. Now that I'm talking about this, preaching without notes, there are some mistakes that you'll make that you will not correct yourself. Are you with me on this? Okay. Like you're doing the Albert Einstein. And you know it's the New York World's Fair 1939, but you say 1929. What do you do at that point, preacher? Keep going. No one's going to, well, they might Google it. All right. I've had people do that. But so when you're preaching without notes, you're just going to make mistakes. But some mistakes you correct if it's false doctrine. But some mistake, just put the pedal to the metal. It doesn't matter if it's 29 or 39. So there are some things you lose when you preach without notes. You just do. But you lose a lot more by preaching with notes. All right? That's kind of what I'm after here. Okay, well, let's go on. So, gosh, I'll say stuff that is improper, untrue, false doctrine. Yes, you will. All right? So why bother preaching without notes? Besides, I've been subjected to the note-free preacher who rambles, goes off on tangents, hems and haws, communicates little, if any real substance, and has difficulty ending his sermon. Anybody heard sermons like that? Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's, all names will be, kept under cover here. But we've all heard, and I'm thinking of one Missouri Synod pastor in particular. I will not name him, all right? But you could tell, after about 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, this isn't prepared. This guy's just winging it. There's times you got to wing it, but not Sunday after Sunday. So who wants to do that, right? Case closed. Forget this preacher without notes. Lesson, go on. Well, Joseph Webb addresses in this book. It's only about 107 pages. You can probably get it for 3 cents on Amazon used books. It's a very helpful book. All right. Webb advocates his approach. He doesn't discount people who preach with manuscripts, all right? That's not or notes, all right? And that's not what I'm trying to say. But he simply challenges people to rise to a higher level of effectiveness. His thesis, simply put, this is page 11, preaching is public address, and if anyone expects a sermon to be interesting, even compelling or captivating, one's preaching must follow the basic rules of effective public speech. And what's that? You don't read a manuscript. Each of the book's 4 chapters then discusses the 4 basic steps to preaching without notes. Chapter 1 examines what goes into the preparation. Key here is the decision to preach a sermon without notes needs to be made when? Before you write it, not after. Right? So it has to be written written. I mean, I'm all about writing sermons. How can you get exact and have word plays and have logos? You got to write your sermons. But you write them with the idea that you are going to preach without notes. Notice that he's not saying, preaching without notes, subtitle, memorizing your sermons. That's not the goal. That's not the goal. It's not to memorize your sermon, to preach without notes. So the first pivot that needs to be made is I'm going to write a sermon that's going to be preached without notes. While any sermon requires clarity, that requirement is amplified many times over when the sermon will be preached without notes. Oh, I've got to make it what? If I'm going to memorize the outline and stuff, it's got to be what? Simple. Simple. Oh, so see, I'm getting where I want to be. Not simplistic, but simple. And if I'm preaching without notes, guess what? It's got to be internalized, right? It's going to come, I mean, generally speaking, right, from my pathos, from my gut, just not my head, right? Because it takes time, and he helps us in this book. But I want you to see that it's more than just kind of, getting up and, no notes, look at me. No, it helps us simplify our sermons. All right? And it gets the pathos going. He says to accomplish this, Webb suggests that every sermon be built on a controlling metaphor. Controlling metaphor. So I've used psychological center. Homileticians talk about that a lot, right? I got to build a bridge with people on the hook part, but I need a controlling metaphor. So it's a huge difference between an opening illustration and a controlling metaphor. An opening illustration just kind of, hooks people, which is fine. But controlling metaphor is going to control the whole sermon. All right? And we'll look at several of my sermons in the Lenten sermon series where I will illustrate a lot of this stuff. So I'm not going to illustrate now, but that's coming. Controlling metaphor. All right, so that's chapter 1. I'm going to write my sermon because I want to preach without notes, and I have a controlling metaphor. Now, let me tell you this. When's the best time to try this? Not Easter Sunday. Right? There's a lot going on Easter. Not Christmas Eve. Not probably Confirmation Sunday. When's the best time to do this? In Lent. Because no one shows up. No. I found as a pastor, you know what? And you probably found this out. It's not general, but it's pretty general. People are going to come to Lenten services regardless of your theme, your topic, how dynamic you are. They just have this piety as Lutherans. We go to midweek services. So if again, one of my mottos in life right now, never too late. When you're almost 63, you got to live by that, folks. It's never too late. It's never too late to preach without notes. Yeah, I've been a pastor for 20 years. No, it's not too late. I probably only started after 7 or 8 years, all right, as a pastor. And when did I start? In Lent. In Lent. Because then if I goofed up, people would still come back, right? Guess what? You know what? When you goof up, no one knows. You know, but most of the time people don't know, right? You skip a part, guess what? You skipped a whole paragraph. Probably that wasn't congruent with your outline and your simple presentation. Not simplistic, right? So this is a good time just to try it, right? Lent. All right. Chapter 2. The importance of an outline. An outline. It needs to be specifically tailored for the task of preaching without notes. Webb suggests the sermon be broken up into no more than 10 sequences. Have you ever seen these sermon outlines like Roman numeral 1, A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Roman numeral 2, A, B, C, D. That's way too complex. 10 points. 10 points. 10 sequences. And guess what? Once you memorize the sequences, you're pretty good to go, right? Can you memorize 10 points? Sure you can. This could take time. He'll tell us. But 10 sequences. He says, quote, "Of all the things that recent research has taught us about the enhancement of human memory, none is more important than the clear, concise organization of the materials to be memorized." Oh, so they have to be logical. They need to transition one to another. I'm back to Einstein, right? It's got to be simple. It's got to be understandable. Chapter 3 then turns to the crucial issue of memorization. Here the author presents what research has taught about human memory, as well as specific directions on how to quickly, efficiently, confidently memorize. Webb suggests following the strategy. So this is his strategy. And I won't go into it. I'll talk about my strategy. So I would spend either on Thursday or Friday an hour going through my manuscript. All right? And it is hard work. It's not like looking at your iPhone. It's not like watching TV. It's not like having a conversation with people. This is hard work. This is 60 minutes of pretty intense stuff. And I would take these 10 sequences, or 11 or 12 or 9, whatever, and I would read them out loud 4 times. First time I just read, because you want your eyes going, but also what? Your ears. If you're just trying to memorize stuff with your eyes, you're not using all your senses, right? You can't use your sense of taste or feel, but you can use your sense of hearing. So I'd read through the first paragraph, and then the second time, out loud, I tried to read from memory, and I wouldn't get it. Third time, a little bit better. Fourth time, a little bit better. Go on the second sequence. And it just takes time, about 60 minutes, right? So then what I would do, probably on Saturday, all right, is I would then, I'm just telling you what worked for me, is I'd go out running or biking, and before I do that, I'd look at my manuscript again, and while I'm running or biking, I'd try and preach my sermon. All right? Just try. And oh boy, you know the Hebrew word yonek? Anyone want? It means suck, okay? All right? That sermon sucked, right? Because I forgot places, I forget. It's just no good. But at least I know. This is a weak point, all right? So then I get to church on Saturday. I was thinking about where I served in Fort Wayne, Indiana for 7 years. I get there, and then I try and preach it again without notes. And I'm thinking, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's not good. And then I get up and preach the sermon. So it would take probably about 3 hours of my week to get this down. 3 hours. All right? And I just built that into my schedule. All right, so he's got his way of doing it. You'll have your way of doing it. But it's probably going to be about 3 hours. 3 hours. And guess what happens? Like any muscle, once you use it, it's going to get what? It's going to get stronger, right? It'll get better. Okay, so then the 4th chapter of what he does, he takes up the concepts of your nonverbals. So all communication experts say something like this. 90% of what you communicate is what? Nonverbal. Talking about yonek, right? Oh my gosh, all this logos part that we love and we know, and Isaiah and Paul and Jesus. If there's not the right what? Nonverbal, most people are going to what? Probably not remember, connect. What was he trying to say anyway? So what preaching without notes does is that enables us to be more cognizant of the nonverbals. right? How am I going to actually say this? What are my hands going to do? Where am I going to be looking? Just some of these nonverbals. So chapter 4, he makes the case if you're preaching without notes, it helps you with your nonverbals. Okay? He says this quote on page 105. Our sermons are in our faces. We would do well to know that our facial expressions and our words had best match. Right? It's okay to smile in church. Right? Our nonverbals can be much more pronounced when we are preaching without notes. He says then at chapter 5, last chapter of the book, he crafts a sermon on the life of John Mark in the New Testament as a way to illustrate each of these 4 points. Now, the sermon itself isn't that good. All right, just my opinion. I mean, the law, gospel, Christ crucified, there's nothing of that, right? He's United Methodist. But at least he does take you through the steps in a practical way. At the heart of the discussion is the idea that preaching without notes is not only a method of delivery, but a method of preparation. So there you've got it. Preaching without notes gives the sermon life and energy, credibility and intimacy that it does not otherwise have. That's Joseph Webb. What I find is that when you're preaching without notes, you internalize it so much more, and it really edifies you so much more, right? Because you've eaten it, right? It's yours. You own this to some extent. And to go back to the Albert Einstein quote, it helps simplify things. Simplify things. To get back to Aristotelian rhetoric, it helps you with your pathos, your emotion. All right, so now we shift gears here. We can go to the next slide. What I did, I used to teach Hom 2 at the St. Louis Seminary. After about 7 or 8 years, I came up with something called Lessing's Laws. Lessing's Laws. My name isn't Greg. I couldn't have Greg's Gospels. So I end up with Lessing's Laws. There's a famous painting by Vincent van Gogh called The Sower. This Van Gogh exhibit came to, it's still in Minneapolis. I went to it. I like artwork. It's really, if you have a chance to go to this Van Gogh exhibit, it's very well done. Anyway, so this is The Sower and the Seeds, Vincent van Gogh, 1888. You can kind of see the birds there. And just kind of a reminder that, we're sowing seeds. So this would be what I try and do. All right. So again, we're approaching this how from different perspectives. Right. So here we go. Lessing's Laws. I've got about 868 of them. No, I think I've got about 31. So here we go. Next slide. And these are in probably no particular order, but just a way, as I said earlier, you've thought about things, you probably do a lot of these things, just to sharpen your homiletical blade. Preaching is the most important facet of ministry. It just is, right? It's what Paul talks about in Romans chapter 10. I read a book, it's very dated now, by John Killinger, titled The Centrality of Preaching and the Total Task of the Ministry. I read that in 1981. He convinced me. It is the most important task. So I approach it that way. You mean you spend 3 hours memorizing your sermon? By the way, I'm not memorizing it word for word, right? but I'm getting it down fairly well. By the way, Carroll of the Fort Wayne Seminary has a very similar preach the word module on how to preach without notes. See, so I've got a preach the word module on preaching the baptized life, but Fakentcher's is probably more helpful because what Carroll tries to do through that module is really help you, see, as CFW Walther said, right, to be a living witness to the gospel. See, so how do I preach without notes? So Fakentcher has some very practical hands-on, it, goes through a whole module. I've just spent, 20 minutes or so. So I would encourage that. But all of that is to say that this is the most important part of my ministry, all right? And so I'm going to spend some time trying to get it down, doing my homework, finding that controlling metaphor that we will look at several of my Lenten sermons. So preaching, good preaching, is going to impact how people come to me in terms of counseling, how people invite their friends to come and worship with them, how people are going to understand me as also someone they want to learn from as a teacher. We all want people to come to adult Bible class. Good preaching will enhance that, as many as all of you know. So that's actually, right up there at the top. 2, there it is, render the audience well disposed to the speaker. Again, if they don't like you, they won't like what you have to say. So how do I be relatable? See, again, this isn't, there's more to it than that. I mean, we get that. But this is a part of it under the first article. How can I be more relatable? And we've looked at that in the Richard Kapfer article, Pastor, What Does It Feel Like? Use the psychological center, as I already said. That's what Kapfer is saying in terms of your addressing people's feelings, right? And I've already expounded on that a little bit. I won't do that too much more. Some Sundays and preaching occasions are more important than others. We all know that, right? You know that Pentecost 10 may not sink your ministry, right? Christmas Eve is really important. So what do you do? What do you do with that? Do you just kind of say, well, yeah, Christmas Eve is more important? You spend more time on Christmas Eve. You start thinking about Christmas Eve, in August or September or July. You with me on this? Easter. You've got to be thinking Easter right now. At least what's my text? Do I have a controlling metaphor? What am I going to try and do? If I treat, and we've all done this, right? All Sundays and preaching occasions as the same, then we're really not being wise. Not being wise. So what are your most 5 or 6 important preaching assignments every year, and start thinking about those now. At St. Michael Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, I always knew when different school choirs were singing, especially when Concordia Lutheran High School a cappella was singing, because you know what would happen? Especially when the Concordia a cappella choir came, we went from about 700, in a weekend to about 1,100 people. That 1045 service would have about 600 people in it. See, because there's all these guests, because the kids are singing. Well, am I going to kind of say, please tell me when the Concordia Lutheran High School a cappella choir sang? Yes, I'm going to do that. Because it's going to be, it's a big Sunday, right? So think about that. Next, teach books of the Bible in adult Bible classes. Not generally, but not all the time, right? What does that do? Now here, I don't want to state this too black and white. But generally speaking, Topical sermons are good occasionally. Are we okay with that? See, a topical sermon. Like God is all loving. I mean, I did a sermon series once, the characteristics of God. It's a topical sermon series. God is love. We looked at a lot of different things. God is all powerful, etc. However, that's not the meat and potatoes of our preaching, right? I don't want to step on too many toes, but it's called popcorn preaching. Everybody okay with that? So you have a text, like from Mark chapter 11. We'll just go back to what Steve was saying. And then what do? Immediately, you go to Ezekiel chapter 3. And then you're in Philippians chapter 8. But there's not a chapter 8, so you go to chapter 4. All right? Then he goes to Psalm 89. And then you go to Proverbs 19. We all know those sermons. It's called popcorn preaching. It's topical preaching. And it doesn't teach people very much about the Bible, right? If anything at all. They think it's just something that you look at in a popcorn way. We want sermons that are textual and actually are didactic too, right? We want to teach people about the Bible, about the book of Acts or the book of Ephesians or of all things, the book of Isaiah. So how do I preach from Isaiah chapter 40, 1 through 11 on Advent 1 and do it holistically in Isaiah? I've led a Bible class on the book of Isaiah. I know Isaiah. I can preach from Isaiah now, all right? So I just see this as a real scourge in helping people learn the Bible, is if they only get popcorn preaching all the time. They have no idea of the richness and the context of what Paul is doing. Let's say in Philippians chapter 2, 6 through 11. Why is he talking about Jesus being the form of God and servant? See, if you're a popcorn preacher, you're never addressing the depths of text. So how do I preach from Philippians with confidence? I've taught a Bible class on Philippians. Everybody with me on this? Okay. Because you don't have time, so your text is from Romans. You don't have time to read all of Romans and study Romans. But you know what? 4 years ago, we went through Romans in 6 months. I got Romans. They're not completely, totally, I get that. But if the pastor's never teaching books of the Bible, then you rob yourself, right, of homiletical insights. Next one. When preaching, go back. When preaching, don't hop, skip, and jump randomly, but stay within that book as much as possible. That really goes with the prior one. If you're preaching from Jeremiah, let Jeremiah speak. See, if you're preaching from John, this is what we'll do in the Lenten series. Let John speak. See, again, the temptation, because we're a systematic denomination, right, is to go to other books of the Bible. Scripture interprets Scripture, and that's fine. But what happens if we funnel everything through Galatians and Romans? Will be completely predictable, right? Everything is funneled through Pauline categories. And we get that, right, systematically. But if that's our preaching, we're let the author of Hebrews preach this Sunday, right? Let Exodus preach this Sunday. So as much as possible. Everybody see that? So if you're in the Old Testament, at some point you want to get to, we preach Christ estauromena, right? It's not a sin to go to another verse if you're preaching from 1 Thessalonians to go to 2 Thessalonians. But our preaching is going to be much more diversified, right? To make it diversified if we stay in the book. It's kind of like a game of chicken, right? I've never done this because I'd be chicken. but you're in one car and the other person in another car, what do? You start going right at each other, and the person who bails first is called what? Very wise. No, chicken. See, so stay in that book as long as you can. Force yourself. Stay in Genesis. There's all kinds of gospel in Genesis, right? And when you're talking about sin, you don't have to always go to Genesis chapter 3. Maybe Ezekiel has something to say about sin, you think? Right? So stay in that book as long as you can. And maybe at some point you got to what? Divert, especially in the Old Testament. See? But stay there. Stay there. How do you do that? You teach books of the Bible. All right? So next slide. 3 to 4 times a year, do something out of the box. Right? I once heard about a guy at St. Mark Lutheran Church, Houston, Texas. He rode a motorcycle down the center of the sanctuary. He's trying to do out of the box. Well, that was his last Sunday at St. Mark Lutheran Church in Houston, Texas. Okay, all right. Once heard a guy, he's preaching from Exodus chapter 3. So he did the whole service just in his bare feet. See, Moses, take off your sandals. You know, he didn't lose the confidence of the congregation. He didn't leave, but he had about a couple years of mopping up the mess. See, so you have to, when I say out of the box, use your sanctified common sense, right? Don't make Steve, get on the phone. But what I mean by out of the box, my friend in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, maybe you know him, Nabil Noor, 4th Vice President of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. What he does occasionally would be first-person sermons. See, so you're John Mark, you're Paul, you're Onesimus, you are Habakkuk. See, just first person. See, that's kind of out of the box, right? It won't, they won't tar and feather you if you do that, right? Maybe you have something that you put. I've done this before. You just get a box, all right, just a cardboard box, and you get up. And you say, I bet you can't guess what I have in this box. It'll take you years to guess what is in this box. If anyone can guess what's in this box, I'll give you, a month's worth of salary, all right? Whatever. And you kind of walk around, you ask, what do you suppose is in this box, right? And then you say, I've got God in this box. What? See, well, we all can find God. J.B. Phillips wrote a book called Your God is Too Small, right? So then what do you do at the end of church or the sermon? You take your box, all right? You open the door, and then you put the box in that door, slam the door, so Dr. Dose wakes up, all right? And you say, that's what we're going to do with that idea that God is in the box. He is mighty, he's merciful, tender, tough, whatever you do. See, it's something kind of out of the box. That's probably not going to get you, fried by the elders. But if you don't do something kind of, sort of different every now and then, guess what? You're completely predictable. And we're predictable enough, right? Law, gospel, Christ, tax, right? We already kind of got that against us, which is not negative, but try something out of the box. Maybe you're a good singer. Ben, are you a pretty good singer? Yeah, see? So you begin by singing the first hymn of, I bind to myself today. Grace to you and peace from God the Father, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I bind unto myself. And what? Dose is singing. Weren't you in the seminary chorus? That's what I thought. Yeah. So is that kind of out of the box? Yeah. And people won't forget that. And then, of course, it's not just to get people's attention. Your whole sermon is probably on the Trinity. See, maybe it's Baptism Sunday of Jesus. How we doing on time? Boy, I can tell. So there's a lot of things, and of course this is something that is kind of unique to your setting, your skill set. If I got up and sang, I'd be, you could tell already when I started singing, boy, he ain't that good. I know. I'm not going to try that. But think about it. Again, this comes under one of another Lessing's laws that we'll pick up after lunch. But you got to plan ahead. You got to plan ahead. Woe to the preacher. No, not woe in a biblical sense. But if you're just working week to week, brothers, that's tough. If you go in on Monday morning, where am I going to preach on Sunday? That's pretty tough. If preaching is the most important facet of the ministry, you plan ahead. So you plan ahead. You're thinking about what could be out of the box. Again, it's going to be edifying, going to help people understand the text, but not make you so predictable. Gosh, did you remember the time Doe sang in church? I wonder if I'll ever do that again. And maybe that becomes your shtick, once a year, but you don't tell them. Once a year I'm going to sing in church, begin the sermon, but I'll never tell you, so you might be kind of surprised. And it might be something. Maybe I already do that. I'm going to stop here because we have a little Q&A. So we'll do personal is the most powerful. We're still on how, right? We'll get to what after lunch. We've done the why and the when. So Q&A. We'll stop here. Anybody out there? All the phone lines are open. Yes, Dave Simonson.
So preaching out of the box or without notes. Do you get out of the pulpit?
Do I get out of the pulpit? That is a question that has to be asked, in Lotse, right? Because some churches, where I'm at now, at Trinity Lone Oak Lutheran Church in Eagan, Minnesota, founded in 1888, for me, get out of the pulpit, it wouldn't be edifying. I mean, people have never seen that. They expect that the sermon's going to be from the pulpit. So I'll oblige to that. Where I was at in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I got out of the pulpit all the time. And they were used to that. I mean, several predecessors had started that. Because I'm not into controversy just for controversy's sake. That's just adiaphora, right? But yeah, I think it depends on what people are used to. Maybe you want to try that. You do it, Lent 3 when, there are 8 people there. And you preach, you say, today at this service, I'm going to preach out of the pulpit. And you just kind of see how that goes. And if you get all these hate mails and, people have called the FBI, you say, maybe that hasn't worked so well. See, but you probably talk to your elders about it and get a thumbs up or thumbs down. But good question. Yeah. You don't want to be a scandal to people at all. Yeah. Other question. Their questions plural. Oh, back here, my good friend Mark.
You were talking about feelings, I'm not used to thinking those ways as far as sermons. You said, worry is not good enough for me. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah, right. So let's just say your text includes 1 Peter 5, verse 7. Cast all your merimenao, your anxiety, your worry, your cares upon him, for he cares for you. All right? And oh man, psychological say, worry, merimenao, right? Divide the mind. I got it, bam. And so what is Peter doing? What is 1 Peter about? Okay, in large part is about suffering as a believer in Jesus. See, so I would want to stay in that book of the Bible, right? I want to speak 1 Peter language and not Romans 3 language. I love Romans 3, right? But then my worry would be worry for living a different life, being a sojourner and pilgrim. That's how 1 Peter 1:1. He picks up those words again in 1 Peter 2:11. So my psychological center is worry about suffering as a Christian. All right? So they're specific enough, and yet it's general enough that, if you're a believer, no one likes to get rejected. No one likes to suffer. So that'd be one example. Let me think of another example. Let me just, let's just say Exodus 1:8 is a pivotal verse. There arose a new king who knew not Joseph, right? Say, well, what's the psychological center there, right? One would be Joseph. And within the context of Exodus 1 and 2, it would be rejection. Rejection. And when you think about Joseph's rejection, say that might be a little bit too broad, but at least the place to begin, would be rejection by people who know you, right? Not by the general public like 1 Peter. It'd be rejection by, in the case of Exodus 1:8, Egyptians, right? Or in the case of Joseph in Genesis, his brothers. So I'm going to start the sermon talking about rejection. Rejection by people who know you. People who know you. Those would be a couple illustrations. But usually you can find it right in like the text or within the book itself. Guess back here, Ryan, the local Lutheran clergy, the Bishop of Carroll, Iowa.
This is in reference to preaching without notes. It took me about 3.5 years to finally get to the point where I could do that. I was told out of the seminary, and I probably want to speak for the vast majority of people who maybe haven't gotten there yet. Fear is a legitimate factor why I never did, because I was just afraid. Not necessarily that specifically of forgetting something, but just public speaking is a scary thing, even though all of us do it all the time. So do you have any specific, encouragements to that side of things for me, it was just, I was afraid to do it. And that thing there is, it's a crutch, but it's that thing, that comfort of like, great, even if I get afraid or I mess up, I still have this thing.
Right. So it could be as simple as, I'm going to preach without notes, but I'll have my manuscript up there in case things go south. See? And that's how I tried it for a while. And after a while, it's helpful. So, do it in stages. Maybe bring a note card up. But even the manuscript is fine. What will probably inevitably happen, though, is you'll start preaching without notes, and then you will kind of think in your mind, oh no, where was I? And then you'll think in your mind, I can't stop and figure out where I'm in on my manuscript, so you just keep going. See, but it could be very incremental. What I found, maybe you've done this, but in St. Michael in Fort Wayne, I would have a funeral. I was just killing people left and right. Probably 2 to 3 times a month. I couldn't prepare a whole manuscript for a funeral sermon, but I didn't want to just be canned, right? So you get to know, usually you know the person, you pick a text, you probably spend 15 minutes on an outline, probably not the 10 sequences, it's a funeral sermon, and then what do? You go in the funeral home sometimes, right? You preach without notes. Sometimes funeral homes, they don't have a lectern, they have a pulpit. What do you do at that point? You can't say, and point B, you're just preaching without notes. So that helps a lot. Just being in a funeral home especially. You're kind of forced to do it. And then you find, I can do this. And I'll just say this one more time, then we'll go to Q&A. You lose a little, you just do, but I'm of the persuasion you gain so much more, right? But yes, my good friend Ben now.
To that same point, is my understanding correct, present company notwithstanding, that nothing erupts or explodes if you go less than 20 minutes?
Oh, right, yes.
Some of the challenge I hope I just
Well, no, you're right. Sure. Yep. So, generally speaking, again, a lot of this stuff is just general. It's not just black and white all the time. If God has given you the gift of communication skills, you can preach longer. You just can, right? If that's maybe not your best gift, then don't press it, right? Yeah. But no, there's no reason, 15 minutes. And so then what you do, and we'll keep going here a few more minutes, but not much, is when you're preaching without notes, you have an illustration, controlling metaphor, and guess what? You memorize Albert Einstein, 1939, World's Fair, New York City. The light was going to be for a 40-mile radius. Guess what? You can tell that story because you remembered the facts. And you can do that with biblical stories, right? You know the fact. You know the sower and the seeds, right? You don't need like 2 paragraphs to remember that. Just say it. Now, you got to prepare a little bit. You just don't say, well, gosh, I hope I remember this. But a lot of preaching without notes is just having the 10 sequences and remembering the facts in each sequence. Takes time, but you're not trying to do word for word. Yeah. So one more back here. Someone have a hand? Yes.
I was just curious, though, if someone requests a manuscript of your sermon and you don't have one, what then?
Right. And so, as I said earlier, I always type out a manuscript. I mean, always. The sermons we're looking at this afternoon, I mean, those are like, field tested or something. See, they're pretty much my sermons from St. Michael, Fort Wayne. So, no, I think you will want to type out a sermon. But there are some parts of the sermon, right? Once you type it out, you say, wait a minute, I know what happened in Acts 9 when Paul was on the road to Damascus, baptized on the street called Straight, Ananias. I know that. I've typed it out, but I don't need to do word for word. It's much more compelling for me to preach about Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus, right? Like this, and just kind of tell it from, what I recall as a Christian, and then it is to say, and then, you understand. Okay, well, I know we're out of time, and David Beagley, one of my former students, has been longing for the day when he can tell Dr. Lessing, sit down and shut up. So I will sit down, I will be quiet. Thank you very much. We'll pick things up at 1. Yeah.
Yep. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Lessing. Before we get to lunch, as we can hear the bells ringing, Jonathan Riggard has an announcement from the district.
Yes, on behalf of the Youth Services Committee, just a reminder, I know circuit visitors and youth reps have had communication. Just a reminder for them and for pastors as a whole for an invite. Had so much fun on this Monday, why not do it again next week? Dr. Lessing, feel free to come. Fort Dodge at St. Paul's, we have our annual Youth Circuit Forum. If you are a circuit youth rep, it's expected, but again, the invite is for all pastors. We have Reverend Paul Dare from Alexandria, Minnesota. Topic is Christians in a woke world with woke ideology, our response, and also teaching that at a teen level. It's going to go from 9 a.m. till 1:30. Lunch is provided for circuit youth reps. Mileage is covered. But again, lunch for all people. Just ask you RSVP by this Wednesday to Rhonda Moore to the district office. So look forward to seeing many there, and thanks for the little plug.
Thank you very much. Ryan, any directions on lunch before we pray? And
We'll leave out, just go straight down those stairs and you'll make your way.
all right, head straight down the stairs, smell the barbecue, and we'll be good to go. So, all right, well, let's just pray together the common table prayer. Come, Lord Jesus, be our guest. Let these gifts to us be blessed. Amen. All right, thank you very much. We'll see you back up here around 1.